Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so kindly for joining us. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. My name is Car Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple, and tonight I'm very happy to welcome you to our event with Mary Jo Bang as we celebrate her translation of Dante Alighieri's Paradiso. Let's give a hand. Joined tonight by fellow poet and translator Tess Taylor. Let's give a hand for Tess as well. And this event is presented in proud partnership with our friends at the Center for the Art of Translation. So let's give a little bit of love for the Center for the Art of Translation. Thank you all for being here. You could be anywhere tonight. I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you for joining us here in person and also online. Hello, online audience. I'm waving to a camera. You can't see, but I'm waving to a camera. We are broadcasting from San Francisco. We open each of our events with a land acknowledgement, and so I would like to let you know that we are operating on unceded Ramaytush land. We think that land acknowledgement requires action of some sort, and so we encourage you to donate either your time or monetary means to an Indigenous organization each time you hear a land acknowledgement. There are a lot of ways to participate in this project of rematriation, but we generally direct people to the information about the Ramaytush Land Trust at the back desk if you are interested. That is one way. Very brief business before I let our poets take over. Now is a good time to silence your cell phones if you have not already. Please do not take a call in the middle of the event, at least while you're sitting here. Please do check out our full event calendar online at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season ahead of us, including the event you are currently attending. Please do, if you are able, buy books. Please do buy books from us, your hosts this evening. If you've been here before, you've certainly heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you support the writers who put so much work into making these books, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you are able, we always appreciate it. Thank you so much. As I mentioned, this event is presented in partnership with the Center for the Art of Translation, and so I'd like to let you know a little bit about them and the work that they do. Our fond San Francisco friends, the Center for the Art of Translation, is a San Francisco-based nonprofit that champions literary translation and translators who bring underrepresented global writers to English readers. CAT builds a vibrant cross-cultural community through its award-winning publisher Two Lines Press, dynamic events that connect readers and translators, and the educational program Poetry Inside Out, which brings poetry translation into classrooms. So thank you for letting us be a part of this CAT team. We appreciate you always and forever. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the two writers who are joining us tonight. First, Tess Taylor's work deals with place, ecology, memory, and cultural reckoning. She's published 5 poetry collections, including Rift Zone and Work and Days. A stage adaptation of her book, Last West, about the life of photographer Dorothea Lange, launches at the Sonoma Valley Museum of Art in November of 2025, is that correct? In November. And we do have copies of that book over there at the front register, as well as some information about the play if you're interested. Her next book of poems, Come Bite, is out from Milkweed in 2027. She translates from French and Latin, and a current translation of Ovid's Tristia, or Exile Letters, is up at Ancient Exchanges. She is joining us from Berkeley, California. Let's give another hand for Tess. And last but most certainly not least, Mary Jo Bang has published 9 collections of poetry, including Elegy, winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award, and her translations of Dante's Inferno and Purgatorio. She teaches at Washington University in St. Louis, and her latest translation of Dante, Paradiso, is the reason we are here tonight. Let's give one more hand for Mary Jo Bang.
I think the way this is going to start, first of all, to say thank you to Green Apple Books, which is so wonderful, and also to the Center for the Art of Translation, which is also so wonderful, is that Mary Jo is just going to plunge in and read us the first canto of the Paradiso, which is the 3rd book of this ascent from Dante from hell into heaven. We're almost there. So she'll kind of pick it up.
And I want to say thank you as well to Green Apple Books and to Carr and to Tess for reading this tome and being prepared to talk about it, and also to the Center for Translation. Canto 1. The glory of the one who moves everything penetrates the universe and shines more in one part and less in another. I was in the heaven that gets more of its rays and saw things that those who come down from on high can't grasp or else can't say, because nearing its desire, our understanding achieves such depth our memory can't follow along. Even so, as much of the Holy Kingdom as I could treasure up in my mind will now be the subject of my song. O good Apollo, for this last task, make me the kind of vessel of your worth you demand to grant the beloved laurel. Up to this point, one of the two Parnassian peaks was plenty for me, but now I need both to enter this final playing field. Enter my chest and inspire as you did when you dragged Marsyas, sheath and shelterless, from the skin of his limbs. O divine power, if you lend me enough of yourself that I can reveal even a flicker of the blissful realm inscribed on my mind, you'll see me reach the foot of your beloved tree and crown myself with its leaves, to which I'll be worthy by virtue of you and my theme. So seldom, Godfather, are the leaves gathered for a triumph of a Caesar or a poet, blame those shameful human cravings, that whenever a heart longs for the leafy offspring of Peneus' daughter, it should deliver a bundle of joy to a delighted Delphic deity. A great flame follows a little spark, so just maybe better voices after me will manage to get Kyra to answer their prayers. The world's sun lamp rises towards mortals by various paths, but the one that fuses 4 circles with 3 crosses takes the best skyway and is linked to the best star and sets and seals the worldly wax more in its own image. The path that had made morning there and evening here, and almost all of that hemisphere light, and this one dark, when I saw Beatrice turn to the left and looking up at the sun, no eagle ever stared at it so long. The same way a second ray usually blasts off from the first and bounces up like a rocket man who longs to come back. Seeing what she did inspired me to imagine doing it, and so I did. I fixed my eyes on the sun far longer than we usually do. A lot is allowed there that our powers here don't allow, thanks to the place having been made specifically for the human species. I couldn't bear it for long, but not so little that I didn't see it outlined in star-like sparks, the way iron comes white hot from the fire. It suddenly seemed like daylight plus daylight, as if that one who was able to had adorned the heavens with a second sun. Beatrice stood there, her eyes fixed only on the eternal wheels, and I turned my eyes from what was higher up to her light. Her look was such that I became inside what Glaucus became upon tasting the herb, a partner in an ocean of other gods. It's not possible to put into words what transhuman means, so let the example suffice for those allowed by grace to experience it. You know, love that governs the heavens, if I was there only as the me you created most recently, you lifted me with your light. When the crystal sphere, which the desire for you makes everlasting, got my attention, with that harmony you discern and fine-tune, it seemed so much of the sky was lit by the flame of the sun that neither rain nor river ever made a lake so wide. The novelty of the sound and the great light lit a wish in me, never before felt so intensely, to know what caused them. She, who understood me as well as I did, so as to quiet my excited mind even before I could ask, opened her mouth and began. You get all mixed up by sticking with a figment of your imagination, so you don't see what you would see if you shook it off. You're not, as you believe, on earth. In truth, lightning escaping its natural place never raced so fast as you back to yours. If I was freed of the first doubt by way of her smiling little chat, I was already deeply enmeshed in the next one. I said I was happy staying wonderstruck, but now I'm marveling at the way I'm able to go beyond these weightless elements. At which she, after a charitable sigh, looked straight at me with that look of pity a mother gives a kid who's acting bonkers, and began. All things have order among themselves, and this orderliness is what makes the universe resemble God. Here the higher creatures observe the imprint of divine worth, which is the end goal of having whatever's created obey that rule. In the order I'm describing, all natures incline toward the primal source. Some bend closer, some less so, according to their various fates. So they move over the great sea of being to various ports, and each brings with it the instinct it's been given. It's this that drives fire toward the moon. It's this that motivates the hearts of mortals. It's this that presses tight on earth and unifies it. It's not only creatures without intelligence that the arrow from this bow strikes, but those that have intelligence and love as well. Divine providence, which settles all of this, makes that heaven remain still, while the fastest one spins just inside it. And now, as to an ordained place, we're being taken there by the power of that bowstring aimed, as with all its shoots, straight at a joyful target. It's true, forms often don't correspond to the intent of the art. This because tone-deaf material fails to respond, so that a creature, once put in motion, will sometimes depart from the course and bend toward another realm. The same way one sometimes sees a flash of fire fall from a cloud, as if an initial impulse got twisted by a bogus pleasure. You going up by my lights is no more amazing than the fact that a mountaintop stream will flow downhill to the lowest point. It would be shocking if you, freed from every impediment, had stayed below, as if on earth a blazing fire stood still. At that, she turned her face back to the heavens.
I love that, Mary Jo, and I wanted to kind of read to you something that you said and also something that Seamus Heaney said about translation. Because, of course, every translation is going to be different. And one of my favorite sentences in this wonderful book is Mary Jo's sentence that says, like the wizard in L. Frank Baum's The Wizard of Oz, every translator stands behind a screen and throws their voice, insisting that the reader pay no attention to the fact that we are not really actually speaking in the language of the author. And depending on the voice one throws, the effects are very different. And I thought that was so interesting. And I wanted to kind of compare that also to something that Seamus Heaney said about translation. He said, verse translation is not all that different from original composition. In order to get a project underway, there has to be a note to which the lines, and especially the first lines, can be tuned. Until this register is established, your words cannot induce that blessed sensation of being on the right track, musically and rhythmically. So there's a couple of notions there. One is about the act of translation being like a fully human performance, like an actor, not something that can be done by AI. And the other one having to do with this notion of self-tuning to find a note or register in which that performance or action will land. So it's a totally, fully thoughtful kind of self-creation. And I'm just really wondering, Mary Jo, first of all, about what you were thinking about as you were creating this Dante, and also when you knew you'd found that note.
Those are two very different questions. I think that I wanted this to be performative because Dante made it that way. The whole conceit behind all three books is that Dante keeps meeting people and talking to them. And if you raise the register of the language too high and you maintain that high level, you no longer begin to hear how different people speak. And so I wanted to keep the register low enough so that people could distinguish themselves, because people reveal themselves by how they speak. And that's particularly true in Dante. So Farinata, the great Ghibelline general, is very arrogant, and everything he says embodies his arrogance. But if it's all thou and canst, you're not going to ever hear that. And Dante himself writes at length about why he chose to write the poem in the vernacular instead of in literary Latin. He said that he wanted the language of the poem to have the warmth with which we speak to our beloveds, our family, our friends, and that literary Latin was too sublime, too beautiful. It would overpower what was being said. He also said that because Latin required specialized knowledge, he, on the other hand, wanted everyone to be able to read the poem, and he said specifically even women, which was quite radical for the time. Yeah, exactly, but it was very radical of him to say such a thing. And so he said that the vernacular is something you learn at your mother's knee, and you don't need specialized language. So another reason. The other thing he said is that Latin would never change. You know, the Latin of yesterday will be the Latin of tomorrow. And he wanted the language to change over time. And that reveals the ambition he had for the poem and his understanding of the way language works. And so I wanted to honor all of those things. And so many translations, particularly translations done by scholars, in an effort, I think, to be kind of true to their idea of being true to Dante, elevate the language so that it's almost as if it's translated from literary Latin instead of from the vernacular. So my whole idea from the very beginning was to lower the register, and that's what I did.
And you've been at it for 20 years. We discussed this over dinner. So that's partly how we get these ideas, like a mother whose child is acting bonkers, which I really love. I've been that mother. I've probably been that child also, to be fair. So as you're working at it, this is other question, kind of the follow-up of like trying to tune the notes of this vernacular that's coming from 13th century Italian and is woven when you get this book, which I'm sure you will, because you're all so hungry to buy books right now and to nourish yourself with like really good pieces of literature. It's very, very, very helpful in this difficult time to read deeply. You'll notice that Mary Jo has not only tuned to this register, but she sort of cross-tuned her her strings to include lots of different kinds of sources of language as well, which he describes in the notes. And I'm just wondering, when you're looking for that vernacular in English, what is an aha moment where you think, okay, I have this tuning in my head. How did I know that I found it?
Well, with that, the example of bonkers, which of course always gets a laugh, the word in Italian is deliro, which is a cognate, so delirious. But when we talk about a child being delirious, it's usually because they have a high fever. Delirious is also used in a non-clinical way as somebody who's on drugs or in a psychic state, but a child never is in that psychic state. And so I had to find something that was not delirious. So how do we describe that child who's bouncing off the walls? And something like the child acting crazy is just too broad. But I remembered, in fact, we both have as a mutual friend a poet named Timothy Donnelly, and when one of his daughters was 3 years old, which was a long time ago, he told me that he walked into the room and she's standing up in her crib and says, "I'm bonkers." And so even the child of 3 knows what bonkers means. And oddly enough, the other day, after thinking about this word again, in the New York Times, there it was already in journalism, the word bonkers. And then I'm talking to someone and they used the word bonkers. And if you look at the Googlegram, plotting of the usage of words, bonkers is like way up. So trying to find the equivalent of how we would describe what a child is doing, because what he's describing is that Beatrice is doing the equivalent of taking a child by the shoulders and saying, "Look, I'm going to explain to you how the universe works, how God works." And so that's how I get a word like that. But it takes me a long time, and I'm usually working on, one of these volumes for a number of years. And so that word undergoes a kind of transformation in my mind, and I'm testing out whether I dare to use bonkers. And, bonkers is probably replacing 3 other earlier iterations of an equivalent. So that's the process, and it happens for almost every word.
And there's lots of kind of things that weren't in Dante that show up, like toaster ovens.
Well, toaster ovens do not. I think what you're remembering is when we talked on the phone and I said, again, invoking Timothy Donnelly, he said, it's not like you're just throwing in a toaster oven and the king of pop. You have a reason for doing every word the way you are. And that is, in fact, that I try to find words that are either embedded in the original, or that mean the same thing but are contemporary.
And there's a weave too, like at the end, when you're talking about the various sources of the language, it goes from Keats and just a number of Byron is in here. I mean, so are you thinking as you pick these words, also as you hear these words, about their literary history as well?
No, I don't think in advance of it. I think what happens is I'm trying to find an equivalent, say for a phrase, and associations will take me to language that matches that I know from poetry. For instance, the sheath and shelterless comes from Gerard Manley Hopkins and spelt from Sybil's Leaves. And so the description of what's happening is that Apollo is flaying Marsyas because he was had such hubris that he challenged Apollo to a singing or playing flute playing contest. And when the muses decide in Apollo's favor, Apollo punishes him by skinning him alive. And so this word sheath is in the original. And so this idea of pulling Marsyas from the sheath of his skin took me to the Hopkins, and then it's like, yes, that fits. Now, other places, one of the ones you didn't mention was the bartender, Moe, in The Simpsons. And he says to Homer, look, Homer's upset about something, and he says, look, Homer, I've got this drink that is going to wipe your mind. And in the Dante, at some point, he says, and whatever was said just, wiped my mind clean. And so there you have an opportunity.
Right.
And the opportunity is so that readers will see a flicker of their own culture. And the reason I want that is I don't want people to think this is some quaint literary artifact. But in fact, everything Dante's writing about is about our own moment, both in terms of his deep appreciation of human psychology, which is phenomenal. I mean, the fact that, Freud hasn't even been invented yet, and Dante's understanding all of this. The other thing is that Dante's living in this moment of extreme partisan divide, where when one party comes into power, they exile the other and raze their houses, burn their houses to the ground. I mean, it's so extreme. And we are in a similar situation where the extremity of people who are acting out against others with different ideas is one that visits violence upon people. So that feels like the important thing is that we see that this is our own time, and that what Dante is trying to do is to elevate the idea of the Christian ideas. And of course, he was Christian, he was Catholic. That was the zeitgeist in medieval medieval Italy. But he also has compiled ideas from all different thinkers and early Christianity. And even, he's invoking Apollo in the beginning of the Paradiso, because he's taking ideas from everywhere, and he's trying to show us how not to rupture the social fabric and how important it is. And of course, in his thinking, the wages of that will be either inferno or purgatorio, or even a lesser heaven, because all the heavens are not equal. They all enjoy God's love, but your experience of that bliss varies in terms of how good you were on earth. So the fact is that he's not really trying to frighten us about what's going to happen after death. He's saying there are consequences, but the consequences are even when you're living. And of course, he knows firsthand, he's been exiled from his place of birth and the place he loves, and where his wife and children are living, on pain of death. And when his children come of age, they have to leave as well. So, it's very like our own.
We were talking a little bit about this being written in Ravenna, which is the place he ended up at the far end, and that he was weaving together actually images that were in the mosaics on the ceilings of the churches in Ravenna, and using them partly again within the frame of the Paradise, which I just find to be so lovely. And I guess I hadn't expected this book to be quite as philosophical as it is. It's really trying to work out how you can be of one being with God, but also have to deal with the fact that maybe you're in a separate part of heaven, but then have that part of heaven be okay also, you know? There's these nuns who were exiled for not breaking vows of their own choosing, and he has to sort of work out how a kidnapped nun could not be in a perfect heaven. And that's kind of, it's really interesting to watch him grapple. And it's really interesting also, I think, because to your point about women should read this, it's Beatrice who does all the solving of the philosophical problems. But what did you find yourself kind of drawn into or learning? What kind of surprised you in the coming to this text?
Paradiso in particular, yeah.
Paradiso.
I mean,
well, I'm gonna just wait. Let me just Mary Jo Bang in the introduction is very honest that she had read the Inferno and the Purgatorio, but she had initially not wanted to read the Paradiso because she came across a translation of it that was so bad that she shied away. And so in some ways, at the end of this 20-year amazing life journey that she's been on, it seemed natural that she would do this, but she hadn't spent the same formative time with this because initially she didn't like it. And so I'm interested, do you mind if I just make that spoiler alert?
No.
No, and so I'm really intrigued by, did you come to like it? And also what did you learn and what surprised you? And I would imagine it was a changing experience, right?
Yeah, no, I love Paradiso, and it's very dear to me. And there are moments there that are so beautiful that they are among the most beautiful lines in poetry. And I've tried to respect those and make them beautiful in English as well. What you were saying about the nuns, it's really rather brilliant of Dante because because he knows about human nature, he has to somehow find a workaround for the fact that some people are better than others, right? And so they're all good enough to go to heaven, but are there no consequences to some of the things we do? And for instance, leaders who chase after fame instead of helping people. Yeah, they go to heaven, but don't they have to be lesser in some regard? So he has these 10 heavens, the 10th of which, and 10 is a magic number, the 10th of which is the light and love of God, it's the mind of God. And so he meets people along the way. The heaven of the moon, since it's the farthest from God and the closest to earth, is for those people who broke divine or sacred vows, and these two nuns that he meets are among them. So if you break a vow, shouldn't there be some, consequence? And then it turns out that they broke their vows because they were kidnapped by men from the convent, usually because they were forced to marry to make political alliances. And so Dante is uneasy about this. Like they didn't have any choice. How can they have to pay a price? And Beatrice explains that, well, the fact is that if the will is strong enough, they would have gone immediately back to the convent, even if it meant their death. Now, that's pretty harsh, right? But at the same time, what he's trying to do is create a system that makes sense of the various activities that humans engage in. But the salvation is that they are as close to God as anyone. They just don't feel God, the bliss, as deeply. And yet they are just as happy, because he says to one of them, he says to Piccarda, wouldn't you rather be a little closer and, up close and personal with God? And she's like, there's no one who isn't happy here, because that's the nature of love. And you have to be happy. It's divine. This is what God laid out. And we want what God laid out because we want this perfect world. So, it's brilliant, I think, of him.
It's very interesting, as I think many of us get the Paradiso and we really get to think of all these realms of hell. But it is really interesting to try to spend that much time on the nature of happiness and on the nature of contentment and on the nature of sort of being blessed. And I was thinking of, to be in the place just right is to be in the valley of love and delight. But what is that unity? And I actually found that really wonderful. It's hard to do happiness well in this time and ever, I think. And I found this sort of philosophical argument with happiness really good. I wanted to mention that Mary Jo started this project sort of in a very distant way a long time ago with her friend Timothy Donnelly, who's a friend of mine. And they sat on the floor of her apartment and they just started to read Dante. They had never read it. They were embarrassed that they had come so far as poets and not read such an important book. And they had two different translations. So they read two different translations to each other, and it was of the Inferno. But I thought to give a sense of maybe what Mary Jo did and how radically different it is from any other translation, I would bring in another working translation, which is the Ciardi. And one of his value systems is maybe the orderliness of rhyme. Maybe the orderliness of the universe is captured by his rhyme. But you can see, of course, every act of translation is a series of values that brings the text across, and you leave some things behind and bring others. And I thought it would be really neat for Mary. Well, I could read first, or you could read first. I think we were going to do 25 to 45 of Canto 2. Yeah. Do you want me to go first? And that way you can hear. So this guy, it would have been I should know what year.
54.
54. Yeah. Well, anyway, 61. This one says 61, but I think
that's a reprint.
Reprint, yeah. I found myself in a place where a wondrous thing drew my entire attention, whereat she, from whom I could not hide my mind's least yearning, turned and said as much in joy as beauty, to God, who has raised us now to the first star, direct your thoughts in glad and grateful duty. It seemed to me a cloud as luminous and dense and smoothly polished as a diamond struck by a ray of sun enveloped us. We were received into the elements of the eternal pearl as water takes light unto itself with no change in its substance. If I was a body, nor need we in this case conceive how one dimension can bear another, which must be if two bodies fill one space, the more should my desire burn like the sun to see that essence in which one may see how human nature and God blend into one. Then shall we witness what we hold in faith, not told by reason, but self-evident, as men perceive an axiom here on earth.
I saw I'd arrived where something wondrous caught my eye, so that she, from whom nothing I cared about could be hidden, turned to me, as glad as she was lovely. Address that grateful mind to God, she said, who's merged us with the first celestial body. I had the feeling we might be tucked away in a cloud, crystalline, dense, solid, and polished, almost like a sunstruck diamond. The eternal pearl had taken us into itself, the way water takes in a ray of light while remaining undivided. If I was body, and if here we can't conceive how one dimension can merge with another, which must happen if body infuses body, then all the more we need to turn up the heat under our desire to see that essence in which we see how our nature and God's are one. Excuse me. There you'll observe what we hold by faith, not proven, but made known in and of itself, like the self-evident truth. humans trust in.
Ooh, right? And I love self-evident. Of course, that's a very important, self-evident truth is a very important term to some of our founding documents here in this country. But I'm really interested, maybe we're going to turn to discussion in a moment or two to know what people heard and think. You know, I'm going to be honest that I actually got two other translations, the Charity and the Mendelbaum, and I found myself toggling between the three of them to sort of think about it all the more, because it's really dense. And I would think, oh, Mary Jo did something really great. And then I would think, I don't understand, like, what's going on there? And, you know, it's not like any of us has really been to heaven.
Not for more than a second.
Not for more than a second. Mary Jo, you said that you wanted to read this because it's one of your favorite passages. What are some things that you love most about it?
Well, the idea of the moon as the eternal pearl, I think is rather brilliant. I think the other thing is that this idea we were talking about before of these really difficult concepts, that there's a clarity that Dante achieves that is inspirational. You know, it inspires me as a poet to be more clear. And that idea, and Chardy puts in a body, but it's body. And I had the wonderful fortune that a Dantist got interested in my translation and offered to look at and read every canto and every note. And she ended up doing it not once, but twice. And so she would read it, I would make changes, she would look at the changes, and she would nudge me even closer to the original. And I'm so eternally grateful to her. But that was one of the moments where I also had, where a body, you know, whatever, and she said, no, it's very important. It's not a body. You can see there's no article there. It's body. And so that whole idea of what body is capable of, what material, what matter is capable of. And Dante is thinking along those lines every moment of everything he says. He's just, I think he's trying to get it right all the time. And we know that he actually went to a lot of the monasteries in that era would give courses. And we have reason to believe, we commentators, Dantes, have reason to believe that he went to a number of these and took classes in theology as a way of trying to refine his ideas and to make them consistent with theology. And so, you know, in the end, you have to be very careful, and as a poet, not to overestimate, as I did in the beginning, my own poetic kind of inclinations, or I know best. No, you know, after working with, and I worked with a British Dantist on Purgatorio, and he read the whole thing and gave me notes. And, you know, occasionally I would argue with them and say, well, but I think that, and it's like, well, you would, yes, except go back to Inferno, Canto 4, that line. And, you know, if you see how that line is going through, and then I was, you know, I was daunted.
Daunted, I love it. This is maybe my last question for you. Well, it's kind of two questions. I'll just link them together. How has this changed your own life as a poet, of your own work? And now that you've spent 20 years doing this, how does it feel to be at the end of this? Mary Jo confessed to me, you know, while the microphones were off, that she finds herself vacuuming more.
Which is not a bad thing.
But I'm interested, so, you know, 20 years of being on this pilgrimage,
yeah.
with Dante, after Dante, what did that give you as a writer, and also what to make of the space that this finishing this project leaves?
Well, I think that the closest way to describe it would be like having imaginary friends. And Dante and Beatrice were my friends. And, I would sit down at the computer every day and say, what are you guys doing? And, so I miss them. Somebody asked me in an interview if I missed Virgil after he left. And it's like, no, I mean, it was crushing when he left, but then I had Beatrice. And so I didn't miss him so much. But these characters became very real to me in a sense, and they were companions, and I do miss having them. But, I teach, and my students are something that I spend a lot of time with. And I find myself in class saying, well, this is just like what Dante said. And it's like the same thing as like, well, Timothy Donnelly said this. So I feel like they've insisted themselves into my life, these characters. I don't know what the rest of my life will be like without them. While I was getting close to the end, I would think, well, maybe I should translate, some of the other Dante works, but they don't interest me in the same way. They don't have the same narrative. It's not like a story, and it's that story that I think I loved.
Yay. And how did it change your writing?
Did it? I think it has. I try to be more clear, I think, with, difficult problems, difficult questions. And I think I used to complicate the language as a way of mirroring the complications and not wanting to be reductive. But I've just been so impressed with how he takes the most difficult questions, and yet he's always trying to be clear. So I feel like I've begun to try to be clear without simplifying things.
I love that. I think this would be a great time to ask for your questions and comments.
I have a comment and a question. Most scholars and readers and even teachers of this time emphasize people like Petrarch, and the beyond these three books, Dante. It's very sad that most people don't know that Dante wrote incredible love poetry also, and that Michelangelo as well, like from the Penguin book of from verse from this period. And it's just like, I think it's really sad because they're incredibly good. And that's the first comment. And the second one, do you think that in terms of John Milton's Paradise Lost, do you feel, first up maybe a general comment about it, do you feel that John Milton relied heavily on Dante for his writing?
The fact is that Timothy Donnelly and I tried to read Paradise Lost. I was interested, but he wasn't. So I have to admit I've never read it, so I can't make a comment about it. But in terms of Dante's love poetry, I assume you're talking about Vita Nova and some of the early poems. But yeah, I think that the narrative quality of the Divine Comedy is what holds people's interest, though. Yeah. But thank you so much.
Sure.
Others? Oh, wow. So, yeah.
Got it. I was just wondering if either of you have worked with translators of your own work.
I have, and I've had my work translated into Spanish and German and Italian, and the various translators, because I'm still living, have made use of me. in terms of what did you mean here or what were you thinking, and others haven't. And when I look at the translations, even knowing the cognates, I can see that it's a much better translation if someone asks me. So, yeah, I really appreciate when I get a chance to explain things, and particularly because, as I said in earlier work, sometimes the work was more associative, and maybe they might not know exactly what I was thinking. Tess?
I've had my work translated into Spanish, and I did work with a translator. And one day I woke up and found through social media that there were like 12 poems of mine in a Polish newspaper. And I admit I have no idea how they are. I didn't find a Polish person that day. I didn't find anybody to tell me if they were any good. So I don't know. And I do think there's a way that things sort of move beyond. I mean, there's a thing that Ovid said, "Go little book, go into the city without me." And I think there's a way in which sometimes things move. And I translate from the Latin, which means I can never ask. Never. Not once. Virgil will never tell me what he meant. Yes.
So, Mary Jo, you said that many things in your poems were associative and that they wouldn't be necessarily obvious to a reader who was not in this culture, maybe, and had similar associations. And I'm wondering, since so much of the Commedia of Dante's work is incorporating contemporary events, contemporary characters, and his foes and his allies, and so on, all of which would have been completely recognizable to any reader at the time. It was all the gossip, of the political gossip and so on. And I'm wondering how, and I know you have made an effort to include characters that we would recognize, that we as Anglo-American readers would recognize, and so those associations are closer to us. How do you decide, I mean, when you think of like Mo the bartender, is it just that it comes up in your mind, oh, this is exactly like that scene in The Simpsons? Or are you thinking, who's an equivalent character? What is that? How do you go about, because there are infinite cultural resources. So how do you decide?
Each one is different, or at least there are some categories. So one is that I have an association. Another is I go looking for it because I want these more contemporary allusions to happen periodically, not so often that it overwhelms, not so random that I go for 4 cantos without any of them. So say I have a canto and I haven't had any, I go looking for some. So I might think, well, there's the word pride in this one. Surely there are poets who have lines about pride. So pride plus Shakespeare, pride plus John Milton, pride plus Sylvia Plath. I'll just go looking, and then I find something. It's like, no, that's not close enough. I look further until I find something that I feel like is a good match, and something, for instance, I don't use living poets because that gets into all sorts of problems, like who you used and who you didn't. So the poet has to be dead, but the songwriter can be living. So I have, I've used lines from Dylan, from Led Zeppelin, from Marvin Gaye, from so many, but often it's only in the notes. So for instance, there's a line in Paradiso, like a feather in the wind. Now that's Dante's, right? But that's a an idiom that we have, and that's often used in poetry and in song. So I go online and I look for Feather in a Wind, and A Winter's Tale has it. So I've got Shakespeare and a Led Zeppelin song. So that's only in the notes that these things occur, because Feather in the Wind is Dante's. But I'll say in the notes, recent examples are, and again, as a way to let people know that the language of these books continues, and that poets continue to use them. They are useful as ways to explain how the world works, how we, as humans work. So the wipes my mind I probably went looking for, because I have to admit that unlike South Park, I haven't seen every Simpsons episode.
What have you been doing?
Exactly.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes.
I want to ask, how do you think that Dante's own theology has been affected by his life? Because the Divine Comedy was very controversial when it came out.
I'm afraid there's some noise back here.
He said,
Yeah.
how has Dante's theology been affected by his own life? Because the Divine Comedy was very controversial when it came out. Did you have more of that question?
Yeah. And what are the main ways it diverged from mainstream Catholicism at the time?
What are the main ways that it diverged from mainstream Catholicism at the time?
Well, for one thing, he puts a number of the popes in hell, head down in the equivalent of baptismal fonts, and the new pope gets pushed in after that one.
Ooh.
Yeah. And so when, at one point, Dante was considered a heretic, and the Catholic Church was very anti-Dante. And then, over time, they softened that, and they probably saw that, the nepotism and the corruption in the church was something that historically there was evidence for, and so they accepted Dante as a religious writer, but he was taking the church to task in so many different ways, and he was saying that they have really left what the principles of the early church fathers, and he just was unsparing. And he had people, like he had St. Francis talking about, how corrupt all the monasteries were. So he would put into people's mouths these words that he wanted to say. And so you can imagine the outrage on the part of the organized church. And he was particularly scathing about Boniface VIII, who he felt was responsible for his own exile. And he had gone with some other people to Rome to talk to the Pope to try to have him intervene in this partisan divide in Florence. And the others were let go, and Dante was kept. And then he received his notice of exile and threat of death. So he blamed him for that personally. And, at every turn, he finds a way to have other people say how horrible he was.
And he won in the Republic of Literary Time. So the poet Ellen Bass, who's a very wonderful poet, I don't know if she translates, but she's really fun to do events with, because at the end of the event, she also says, if you love this event, you need to buy a book. It doesn't need to be a book of one of us that's up here, although that would be great. But you do need to buy a book, because we are living in a world where every kind of support of independent bookstores is a political and social act. And we need to thank places like the Center for Translation and also for Center for the Art of Translation. And we also need to thank Green Apple Books on the Park for hosting this place for uncensorable ideas. So I think we are allowed to sit here and wait for you to come to us with a book. And then we could talk to you even more. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here.
Can we give one more hand for Mary Jo Bain? I could not have said it better myself, so what Tess said.
And actually just what Ellen says.
And what Mary Jo, thank you so much for letting us be a part of this, a small part of this endeavor of yours. Tess, thank you so much for reading so closely and for your enthusiasm. And to the cat folks, I appreciate you including us in this as well. And to everyone who came out to celebrate translation, I appreciate you all. I will be brief and let you know. We have books by both of our authors at the front register. You can find them there, and they will indeed be here signing them. So go forth.
One more hand for Mary Jo for 20 years. 20 years of following